Hi there. Welcome back. One of the things I don't think we talk about enough is how different relationships feel when we're older. They don't feel better. They're not worse. They're just different. When we're younger, we're often building from scratch. Maybe we're starting careers and buying furniture and raising kids and making plans. Our lives are still taking shape. But later in life, many of us aren't starting from scratch at all. We're bringing decades of experiences, routines, friendships, responsibilities, memories, habits, and even expectations into the whole picture. And that creates a question that doesn't get asked nearly often enough. How do we build a life together when we already have one? That's what I want to explore today. I think many of us grew up with a certain picture of relationships. You meet someone, you build a life together, your worlds gradually merge. But for many women in this stage of life, that's not the situation anymore. We already have a life. We have our own routines, our own interests, our own friendships, our own ways of doing things. We've spent years, sometimes even decades, creating a life that works. And while connection is wonderful, most of us aren't eager to erase ourselves in order to have it. That's where things become interesting, because we're trying to balance two very human desires. We want closeness, and we want to remain ourselves. I think one of the unspoken fears that many people carry is this. If I let someone into my life, will I lose parts of myself? It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's just subtle. Will I stop doing the things I enjoy? Will my priorities change? Will I feel pressure to fit into someone else's routines? Will I slowly disappear into a version of life that doesn't feel quite like mine? Those concerns aren't selfish, but they are understandable, especially if you've worked hard to rediscover yourself after you've gone through a major life transition. One idea that's helped me is recognizing that together doesn't necessarily mean merged. Two people can be deeply connected without becoming identical. In fact, healthy relationships often allow room for individuality. You can love someone and still have separate interests. You can care deeply about someone and still need solitude for yourself. You can share a future without sharing every last moment. Sometimes we assume that connection requires complete integration. I don't think that's true. I think connection requires respect. The goal isn't for one person's life to absorb the other. The goal is to create something new. Not your life, not my life, our life. And that our life may only occupy part of the picture. There can still be room for your friendships, your hobbies, your traditions, your goals. The relationship becomes an addition to life, not a replacement for it. One of the most valuable things we can bring into any relationship is curiosity. Instead of assuming this is how it has to work, we can ask instead, what would work for us? Maybe you don't want traditional expectations. Maybe you don't want to combine everything. Maybe you do. There isn't one correct model. The question isn't what everyone else does. The question is, what allows both people to flourish? Here's my reflection. Perhaps the challenge isn't learning how to fit into someone else's life. Perhaps it's learning how to create space for a shared future while still honoring the lives that we've already built. That requires communication and flexibility and patience. And more often than not, a willingness to let go of old assumptions about what relationships are supposed to look like. The good news? At this stage of life, many of us know ourselves better than we ever have. And that can become a tremendous advantage because we're not building from scratch. We're building from experience. And maybe that's exactly what makes this chapter so interesting. If you enjoyed this conversation, you might also enjoy when independence becomes part of your identity. That was a previous video because these two topics are deeply connected. That's all for now. And as always, take care, be curious, and bye for now.